Alex Salmond's here, the leader of Alapa up in Scotland. 10 years ago to the day, Alex, I dare say you probably have tears in your eyes thinking about what you were doing this time 10 years ago, about to enter a referendum which ended up not being quite as close as our referendum on leaving the European Union.
Oh, that was your referendum, mate.
Yeah.
Got it now. No,
I say ours because we won.
I know. I've decided that I'm really quite angry about it all, Mike. After 10 years, I want a recount. That's what I want. I've decided now to ask for a belated recount on the referendum.
Well, I mean, that's what Keir Starmer was after, wasn't it?
I was a bit teed off by the result, Mike. I think probably because, you know, when we started the campaign back in 2012, if you'd said to me, you know, yes, you're at 28%, but I think you'll get to 45%, then I would have been quite pleased, I suppose. Mm. But because the race tightened so much in the last couple of weeks, it was a bit of a disappointment when we didn't make it. You know, I thought we might just go over the line, and it didn't happen. So it was a bit disappointing. And you know, 10 years later, the pain hasn't entirely gone away, Mike.
Right. Well, it's a bit like England getting to the final of the Euros, isn't it? You know, every time it's happened, or shall I say the last two times it's happened, you know, everybody gets very, very excited and thinks, oh, this is it, this is the time. And if they'd gone out in the semis, it wouldn't have been a problem. But when you get to the final, as you did, metaphorically speaking, you kind of think you're disappointed. You're not happy about coming second. You're not happy about losing. But it was quite a big margin in the end, though, wasn't it?
Are you saying I missed a penalty or something?
Well, you kind of did, yeah. You didn't show up for the final sort of 20 minutes and you got beaten by a better side.
I don't know if they were a better side, better together. They were a pretty depressing bunch. I mean, if you remember their self-title, where they called themselves Project Fear, that was their own title, how they described them. You know, a pretty awful group of...
But weren't they referring to the other side, though, when they said that?
Well, they actually described themselves as Project Fear, and of course they got their comeuppance in the general election of 2015, when there was only one Labour, one Liberal, one Tory MP left in the whole of Scotland. Mm. So I suppose we did get a wee portion of revenge a few months later, but it doesn't quite make up for the nation not being independent and not exercising a right of self-determination.
But you must also look back on those halcyon days when the SNP was very much on the rise, and the SNP was very much the party that kind of modern people wanted to be associated with. And now, you know, I saw the SNP's conference, and it looked like it used to look kind of 30 years ago, you know, a collection of sort of, you know, miscreants, nutters and weirdos, you know, all...
Yeah, but I mean, come on, Mike, they still look better than the Liberal Democrats.
Well, listen, that's no contest, I'm afraid.
But no, I think you've got a point, obviously. I mean, there was all sorts of things said by the no side in the referendum campaign. You know, Scotland will be too weird, too poor. You won't get into Europe, ironically. You'll drift up and you know, to the North Pole and all sorts of stuff like that. One thing they didn't say, because it would have been ludicrous, was that the SNP in these days couldn't run the Parliament efficiently and the government efficiently. And, of course, that's something the SNP have lost over the last few years, that great advantage of being able to point to a track record of good governance, which is quite important, you know, when you get into the nip and tuck of a referendum campaign. So they'll have to restore that, or alternatively, of course, you could have an independence party like Alapa or others who are not contaminated with some of the mistakes that the SNP have made in government.
Well, this is it. I mean, you've often said that one of the problems that the SNP have got is that they've forgotten what they're for. You know, they're supposed to be for independence, and they've spent the best part of the last, I don't know, 10 years maybe, since you were no longer the leader, kind of getting themselves involved in all kinds of ridiculousness about gender identity and, you know, punishments and sending people to the wrong prisons and, you know, getting caught up really in an awful lot of culture wars.
You forgot bottle schemes.
Well, bottle schemes, ferries. I mean, I could go on, but my point is that they've sort of lost the ideal that they once had, which was all about getting independence for Scotland. And instead, they were trying to run Scotland, but they didn't run it very well, as you said.
Well, that's right. I mean, they lost two things. One, I mean, as First Minister, and every one of my ministers, you know, it's not something you do alone. You know, we had a drive and determination that we'd do everything as best we could, basically because we wanted to build the case of competence to help the case for independence. You know, obviously you want to govern well for its own sake, but it's also an asset in arguing the case for independence. As for the self-identification nonsense and all that tripe, I mean, I've got to think that, you know, at that stage, you know, Nicola Sturgeon's government were starting to give up on ever making progress in independence. So they sort of cast around, you know, is there something else we can do? And unfortunately for Scotland and for the SNP, they alighted on something as divisive, seriously divisive, as gender politics and identity politics, which, you know, virtually no country in the Western world has managed to address satisfactorily. So why on earth you would embark on that misadventure when you're meant to be uniting the nation about independence? Goodness only knows. I've never seen a satisfactory explanation for that.
No, indeed, and they pretty much destroyed themselves from within. But talking of that, let's talk a bit about Ed Miliband and, you know, his latest scheme. I mean,
do we have to?
Well, we do, because unfortunately he's still part of the government.
Sorry, wait a minute. Isn't losing a referendum 10 years ago punishment enough without flinging, you know, Ed Miliband out?
Well, sadly, he's still around, and have a look at this, because he wants to make Britain an energy superpower outside of, obviously, oil and gas.
We know we can only deliver energy security, lower bills and good jobs for today's generations if we become a clean energy superpower. And we can only deliver climate security for future generations, including Emma's daughter, by showing global climate leadership built on the power of our example. That is the summary of what this government is setting about doing.
And I'm afraid that's the bad news, because you know, this is after shutting down. Yeah, this is after shutting down all oil and gas licences in the North Sea, which I'm pretty sure you're not very happy about.
Well, I mean, Ed Miliband's a disaster. I mean, look, you know, two things. One, it's something that Ed Miliband will never do. As First Minister, I had Scotland 4% ahead of our greenhouse targets 6 years early. You know, we achieved the 2020 targets in 2014. And I made Scotland self-sufficient in renewable energy. And I did all of that without shutting down the oil and gas industry and putting tens of thousands of people out of work. And I was still a First Minister who believed that an oil-producing country like Scotland should actually have a refinery, like the other 25 oil-producing countries. I mean, Ed Miliband can't even bring himself to say that.
Right.
You know,
Grangemouth is now another victim of his policies, isn't it?
Well, it's a victim of inactivity. I mean, you could save Grangemouth tomorrow if you said to the oil companies, look, you've got to refine your oil in Scotland on environmental grounds, because there's no point in taking it away as crude oil by tanker, refining it, and then putting it back again. I mean, what's that going to look like in the River Forth? One long procession of tankers, you know, bringing in the refined product. So you could do that in a sentence. But, of course, given that Ed Miliband doesn't want to issue any licence in the first place, it rather weakens his position. It's all a question of resolve, political determination. I mean, as First Minister, I helped save Grangemouth twice, once acting with Gordon Brown. And I never thought I would say that Gordon Brown was a decisive person of action, but compared to Ed Miliband, it makes Gordon Brown look like a giant.
Yes, absolutely right. Speaking of giants, have you got any advice for Keir Starmer? He seems to have got himself into a bit of a sticky wicket over the business of donations. What I was amazed at today, Alex, and I don't know if you know this, it turns out that since 2019, Keir Starmer has been in receipt of more freebies, more gifts, more donations, personally, than any other MP in Westminster. Now, you know that's a pretty high bar. So this idea that he's come in and he's now being clothed by Lord Wahid Ali, who's also clothing his wife at the same time. I don't know whether he's clothing his children. I find it astonishing that he thinks that he can operate on what he regards as the high moral ground, telling all of us that we're going to have to take a bit of pain in the October budget while he's getting everything for free.
Well, I'm hugely irritated by this. I mean, I wasn't even offered all these things. I think it's totally outrageous. I mean, what has Sir Keir Starmer got that I didn't have? I mean, you know, it's like even a party that you decide not to go to. You like to be asked. So I'm infuriated that nobody offered to dress and clothe me or my family when I was in power. I think this is anti-Scottish discrimination.
Yes.
That's what it is, Mike.
But he's got to surely hand all the money back and all the clothes back, hasn't he, eventually, isn't he?
Well, it's a bit like, it's best not to get into these things early in your term of office. I mean, if you cast your mind right back, and we have two people who can do that, then you remember when the saintly Tony Blair got himself into trouble on a Bernie Ecclestone donation, and it kind of knocked the gilt off the gingerbread, as we'd say in Scotland. I'm not actually certain that his reputation never quite recovered from it. So, it's something you don't want to do, and you particularly don't want to do it when the country's, in austerity, and you've told people to tighten their belts, turn off their heating and freeze this winter.
No, exactly right. Alex, great to talk to you, and happy anniversary. I know it's not that happy, but,
I knew you would do that, Mike. I mean, that is just rubbing it in. See, my view is this, one of the problems we had in the campaign is we had about 48 newspapers arraigned against us, so about every one. Now, if only you'd still been editor of the Scottish Mirror,
yes,
I know that you'd have come out.
I would have backed it. Yeah, I would have done. I probably would have done.
Just to stand out from the pack.
I think they knew that. That's why they sacked me. Obviously,
it was you who lost it, Mike.
Absolutely right. Good to see you, Alex Salmond, leader of the Alipper Party, and of course 10 years ago, leader of the SNP, leading them into the Scottish referendum, which they lost.